0. 60 seconds.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars.
The camera rolls. The lights are bright. The reporter asks a simple question about the moon landing. Suddenly, Buzz Aldrin freezes. The tough military pilot dissolves into a fragile, weeping man. He looks away, haunted by a memory he cannot shake.
We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
This isn't just an old man getting emotional. This is a witness reacting to a truth too heavy to carry. He saw something on the desolate gray surface that changed his reality forever. And new scientific evidence proves that his gut feeling was right. The moon is hiding a massive secret. The warning hidden in plain sight. So, we have all seen the footage. The grainy black and white video of a man bouncing in low gravity, the American flag stiff in the vacuum, and the pristine white suits against the black sky. It is the ultimate image of victory. But here is the catch. There is a side to the story that does not fit on a commemorative stamp. It is the story of what happened to the human mind when it was exposed to absolute, crushing silence. During a televised interview marking a major anniversary of Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin sat across from a reporter. The setup was standard. The questions were the same ones he had answered 1,000 times. How did it feel? What was it like to walk on another world? The crew expected a polished, rehearsed answer. Aldrin is a professional after all. He is a West Point graduate, a fighter pilot, and a man with a doctorate in astronautics. He does not crack. But then, it happened. The reporter asked what the moon means to him now. Aldrin stopped. His hands, usually animated, froze on the armrests. His eyes, which had seen things no other human eyes had seen, filled with tears. For a few agonizing seconds, there was dead air. Then, in a voice that sounded nothing like a hero and everything like a frightened child, he whispered, "The moon is not what you think." The studio went quiet. This was not a tear of joy. It was not a tear of nostalgia. It looked like trauma. He leaned back, looking away from the camera, as if he regretted saying anything at all. Those who were there said the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The confident astronaut vanished, replaced by a man burdened by a heavy secret. So, here is the deal. For years, people brushed this off. They said he was just tired. They said he was getting old. But if you look at the history of the Apollo astronauts, a pattern starts to emerge. They didn't just come back tired. They came back changed, quiet, distant. People who know Aldrin say there are two versions of him. There is the public figure who smiles and talks about Mars, and then there is the private man who stares at the moon with a look of unease. In private conversations, he has described the moon not as a place of wonder, but as a place of magnificent desolation. That phrase is famous, but most people miss the second word, desolation. It implies a state of emptiness that is almost hostile. But the crazy part is that Aldrin wasn't just reacting to a memory. He was reacting to a feeling that science is only now starting to validate. The moon is weird. Geologically, physically, and energetically, it is an anomaly. When Aldrin stood on that surface, he wasn't just standing on a rock. He was standing on a mystery that defies the laws of probability. Think about it. It is exactly the right size and exactly the right distance to perfectly eclipse the sun. The odds of that happening by accident are astronomical. And when you are standing there, looking up at a tiny, fragile Earth, you start to wonder if the setup is too perfect. Aldrin later said that the silence on the moon was not just an absence of noise. It felt like a presence. It felt heavy. It felt like he was an intruder in a museum that had been closed for billions of years. And when he came back, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had left the real world and entered a simulation. This emotional breakdown in the interview wasn't a glitch. It was a leak. The pressure of holding on to the reality of that experience, the sheer, terrifying wrongness of the lunar environment, finally cracked the surface. He tried to tell us. He tried to warn us that the gray rock in the sky is not just a satellite. It is something else entirely. And to understand why he cried, we have to go back to the moment he arrived. But before they even landed, something followed them through the dark. The omen before the landing. Let's rewind to 3 days before the landing. The Apollo 11 spacecraft is hurtling through the void at 24,000 miles per hour. Earth is just a marble behind them. The destination is a growing gray sphere ahead. The 3 men inside, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, are the loneliest human beings in existence. But they weren't entirely alone. On the 3rd day of the mission, the crew looked out of the window and saw something that was not in the flight plan. It was a light. A distinct, glowing object maintaining a steady distance from their ship. It wasn't a star because it was moving. It wasn't a piece of their own rocket because the SIVB stage had been jettisoned thousands of miles ago. Aldrin saw it clearly. He described it as an illumination moving with respect to the stars. Now, these guys are smart. They are military pilots. They know that if they scream UFO over the open radio channel, mission control might scrub the mission. Or worse, they might be labeled as unstable. So, they played it cool. They asked Houston where the SIVB rocket stage was located. Houston crunched the numbers and told them it was 6,000 miles away. Basically, the object outside their window was not their rocket. It was an unidentified flying object. Aldrin later said, "We were smart enough to not say, 'Houston, there's a light out there that's following us.'" They kept it quiet. But the tension in the capsule skyrocketed. Imagine being in a tin can in the middle of nowhere and realizing something is pacing you, watching you. It sets a tone of paranoia that hangs over the entire mission. And that was just the beginning. As they approached the moon, they had to pass around the dark side. This is the side of the moon that never faces Earth. When the spacecraft slips behind the moon, all radio contact cuts off. For 48 minutes, they are completely isolated. No signal, no voice from Houston, just static. During this blackout, the silence is absolute. It is the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. But in later missions, specifically Apollo 10, astronauts reported hearing something during this blackout. They described it as outer space-type music, a strange, whistling radio signal that shouldn't exist on a dead rock. Did Aldrin hear it too? He has never explicitly confirmed it, but the look in his eyes during interviews suggests he experienced things he hasn't fully vocalized. Then came the descent. The Eagle lunar module separated from the command module and began its fall toward the surface. This is where things went from spooky to terrifying. As they dropped toward the gray dust, the onboard computer started screaming, "1202 alarm!" The computer was overloaded. It was processing too much data. The system was basically crashing while they were flying a rocket down to the surface of an alien world. The distraction was immense. Armstrong and Aldrin had to ignore the flashing warning lights and fly by instinct. But here is the catch. The fuel was running out. They had 60 seconds of fuel left, then 30 seconds. If they ran out, they would crash or have to abort, which was a risky maneuver that could also eliminate them. The ground control team was holding their breath. The flight director was seconds away from calling it off. Through the window, the surface was rushing up at them. Craters, boulders, dust. It wasn't a welcoming place. It looked shattered. With less than 20 seconds of fuel remaining, Armstrong found a flat patch. The engine kicked up a storm of silent dust, blinding their view. Contact light. Engines stop. They were down. The Eagle had landed. The relief in Houston was explosive. People were cheering and crying. But inside the lander, the mood was different. It was eerie. The engine shutdown was followed by a silence so sudden and so deep it felt physical. They looked out the window. Nothing moved. There was no wind to settle the dust. It just vanished. Aldrin described the surface as magnificent desolation, but look closely at his face in the photos from that day. Behind the gold visor, there is a sense of awe, yes, but also a sense of being very, very small in a place that does not care if you live or die. They were intruders, and the moon has a way of reacting to intruders. What they were about to discover on the surface, and what instruments would record years later, would challenge everything we know about physics. Because when they hit the surface, the moon rang like a giant bell. The experiment that scared scientists. This is where the story shifts from a history lesson to a full-blown mystery thriller. And this is likely the core reason why Buzz Aldrin says the moon is not what we think. One of the main objectives of the Apollo missions was to leave scientific equipment behind. They set up mirrors, solar wind detectors, and most importantly, seismometers. These are devices designed to listen to the ground, to detect moonquakes and vibrations. On Earth, if there is an earthquake, the ground shakes for a minute or two, and then the energy dissipates. The vibrations are absorbed by the liquid mantle and the density of the crust. It is a dull thud. But on the moon, something impossible happened. During Apollo 12, after the astronauts returned to the command module, they intentionally crashed their lunar lander back onto the surface to test the seismometers. They expected a small blip, a little thud. Instead, the moon rang. And I don't mean a little vibration. The shock waves reverberated through the moon for nearly an hour. NASA scientists were shocked. One of them famously said, "The moon is ringing like a bell." Now, stop and think about that. What kind of object rings like a bell? A solid rock doesn't ring. A planet with a heavy iron core and a mantle doesn't ring. A hollow object rings. A metal sphere rings. This data terrified the geologists. It suggested that the moon is not a solid ball of rock like Earth. It suggested that the interior is either incredibly porous or, as some wild theories suggest, partially hollow. Later, during Apollo 13, the famous mission that failed to land, they dropped the heavy SIVB booster rocket onto the moon. It hit with the force of 11 tons of TNT. The seismometers picked it up. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours. The vibrations traveled 25 miles deep. So here is the deal. If the moon is ringing, it means the structure is unified in a way that natural planets usually aren't. It led to the hollow moon theory. Now, mainstream science says the moon isn't hollow, but that it is highly fractured. They say the dryness of the rock makes the sound travel better. But even that explanation feels like a band-aid. Aldrin knew about this data. He knew that the ground he walked on behaved more like a metal hull than a natural planet. And it gets weirder. Let's talk about the craters. The moon is covered in impact craters from billions of years of asteroid hits. Some of these asteroids were massive, large enough to wipe out life on Earth. When a massive object hits a planet, it should leave a deep hole. But on the moon, the craters are shallow. Even the huge ones, which are hundreds of miles wide, are surprisingly flat. It is as if the asteroids hit something hard just beneath the surface, something they couldn't penetrate. This has led to the speculation that there is a metallic shield beneath the lunar dust. Now, I know what you are thinking. That sounds like science fiction. But look at the density data. The moon is significantly less dense than Earth. If it were made of the same solid rock, it should be heavier. The math doesn't add up unless there are massive caverns or gaps inside. And then there are the mascons, mass concentrations. When satellites orbit the moon, they get pulled down by areas of intense gravity. These are heavy spots buried under the lunar seas. It is almost as if there are heavy metallic structures buried beneath the surface that are throwing off the gravity field. Buzz Aldrin is a man of science. He respects data. And the data from the moon is contradictory. It is a puzzle that doesn't fit together. When he stood there looking at the flat, gray horizon, he realized that this place was alien in the truest sense of the word. It wasn't just a dead rock. It was a structure. The psychological weight of standing on a world that rings like a bell, that has a sky of absolute blackness, even when the sun is shining, is enough to break anyone. Most people don't realize this, but the soil itself, the regolith, smells. When the astronauts got back into the lander and took off their helmets, they were covered in gray dust. They all reported the same thing. The moon smells like spent gunpowder. It smells like the aftermath of an explosion. So you have a hollow-sounding, metal-shielded, gunpowder-smelling world that just happens to be in the perfect orbit to stabilize Earth's seasons and allow life to exist. Is it luck, or is it design? These are the questions that haunt a man like Aldrin. He went there to plant a flag, but he came back with a burden. He realized that we are living next door to a mystery that we are choosing to ignore. And when he tried to reintegrate into normal life, he found that he couldn't. Because once you have seen the truth, you can't unsee it. He came home a hero, but in his mind, he never really left the moon. Why fame destroyed him. When Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, the world didn't just cheer. It erupted. It was a moment of global catharsis. The ticker tape parades in New York were unlike anything seen before or since. Millions of people lined the streets, screaming, crying, reaching out just to touch the car that carried these new gods of the modern age. Buzz Aldrin, alongside Armstrong and Collins, was a certified superstar. He was the second human being in history to touch the face of another world. He had completed the ultimate hero's journey. By every metric of human success, he should have been on top of the world. But instead, almost immediately, he fell into a hole so deep and so dark that he nearly didn't make it out. Within a few short years of returning from the lunar surface, Aldrin's life didn't just fray, it disintegrated. He sank into a depression that was catastrophic in its intensity. He battled severe alcoholism, drinking to drown out a noise, or perhaps a silence, that no one else could hear. His marriage collapsed. His career stalled. He was a man adrift, completely lost in the very world he had returned to save. Now, the standard, sanitized narrative, the one you see in the history books and the polite documentaries, is that he suffered from post-mission blues. The logic goes like this. He had achieved the greatest goal in human history before the age of 40. He had walked on the moon. Once you have done that, what is left? How do you get excited about selling cars or writing a memoir? It's the peak too soon theory. And sure, on a surface level, that makes sense. It is a rational explanation for an irrational collapse. But listen closer. Listen to the specific words Aldrin uses when he talks about that time. It wasn't just boredom. It wasn't just a lack of goals. He famously said, "It's hard to come back to grocery stores and traffic lights after you've seen infinity." That isn't a statement about career satisfaction. That is a statement about a fundamental fracture in reality. That is the description of a man who has peered behind the curtain of existence and realized that the stage play we are all performing on Earth is fake. Imagine it. You are standing on the sea of tranquility. There is no wind, no sound, no color, just a spectrum of grays and the deepest, most terrifying black you have ever seen. You look up and you see Earth. It's a tiny, fragile marble hanging in a vast, hostile void. In that split second, everything makes sense, and simultaneously, nothing matters. You see the artificial nature of our borders. You see the stupidity of our wars, our taxes, our petty arguments about politics. You see the fragility of the human experiment. Then, 3 days later, you are back. You are standing in a grocery store aisle. You are staring at 2 different brands of detergent. People are arguing about the price of milk. You have to wait for a traffic light to turn green. You have to pretend that these little things matter. You have to participate in the charade. For Aldrin, the magnificent desolation of the moon didn't stay up there. It followed him home. The silence stuck to him like the lunar dust that wouldn't wash off their suits. Friends and family reported that he would simply zone out at parties. Amidst the noise and the celebration, his eyes would glaze over. He would stare at the sky with a look that wasn't longing. It was haunting. He had a temper that flared out of nowhere. It was as if a part of his soul was still trapped in that eagle lander, waiting to leave, or worse, waiting for something to happen. But let's connect this back to the moon is not what you think theory. We have to ask the dangerous question. What if his depression wasn't just about having no goals left? What if it was the burden of forbidden knowledge? If you realize that the moon was an anomaly, that we are potentially being watched, or that the celestial body closest to us is actually an artificial construct, how do you talk to normal people? How do you sit at a dinner table and have a casual conversation about the weather when you know, deep in your gut, that the sky is a lie? You can't. You feel isolated. You feel like a stranger in your own species. Aldrin spent years trying to numb that feeling. He was incredibly open about his struggles, which was a brave thing for a stoic military man to do in the 1970s. But even in his recovery, the awe and the fear of the moon remained. He never speaks of it as a friend. He speaks of it as a place of absolute, crushing emptiness. In recent years, as technology has advanced and we've started looking upward again, Aldrin has started to speak more cryptically. He has become the world's loudest advocate for sending humans to Mars. He is obsessed with Mars. "Get your ass to Mars," is the slogan. But why? Why skip the moon? Why is the man who knows the moon best so desperate to get us to the red planet? It feels almost as if he wants us to get away from the moon. He wants humanity to leapfrog it, to go further, to bypass the watcher on our doorstep. It's as if he knows that the moon is a checkpoint or a quarantine zone, and Mars is the first step to actual freedom. And he is not the only one who acted strangely. Neil Armstrong, the calm, collected commander, became a total recluse. He stopped giving interviews. He refused to sign autographs. He wanted nothing to do with the fame or the glory. The official story is that he was a humble engineer who just wanted a quiet life. But maybe, just like Aldrin, he felt that the mission had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Maybe his silence was a coping mechanism, a way to keep the secret by simply never speaking at all. There is a story, often glossed over, that during the mission, while they were sitting in the lunar module waiting to go out, Aldrin performed a private communion ceremony. He had brought a small vial of wine and a piece of bread. He poured the wine into a chalice. In the 1/6 gravity, the wine curled up the side of the cup like a living thing. He read from a scripture. He tried to bring God to the moon. He tried to sanctify the ground. Why do you do that? You don't perform an exorcism or a blessing on a geological formation. You do that when you feel the need for spiritual protection. You do that when you are entering a place that feels godless, or perhaps occupied by something that is not God. So, do you think Buzz Aldrin knows something classified that he is holding back? Or was the sheer emptiness of space just too much for the human mind to process? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of Apollo, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.